The invoice sitting on the mahogany conference table was dated Thursday the 14th. It was routed through a shadow shell company with a total of exactly $74,822.50. That was my money being casually spent. My brother Marcus stood at the head of the room, wearing a bespoke suit paid for by my structural engineering patent. He smiled at the board members while claiming his construction firm had solved the load-bearing deficiencies in the downtown high-rise project. My name is Elias. I am 34 years old and I live in Seattle. I operate as a lead forensic structural engineer specializing in commercial developments and post-tensioned concrete slab failures. Marcus does not know what post-tensioned means. He only knows how to forge my signature on safety compliance certificates. Sitting 3 chairs down from him, I did not raise my voice or flip the table. Panic is an emotion reserved for people who do not understand physics. Every structure has a calculated failure point, and you just need to find the critical weak node. I was currently mapping out his impending professional collapse. Marcus laughed at a terrible joke made by the primary investor. He then glanced at me with a look of absolute, sickening entitlement. He expected me to absorb the financial liability while he took the massive payout. He had been operating this exact way since we inherited the initial capital 5 years ago. Where are you watching this right now, and what time is it? Tell me in the comments, because I want to know exactly when your breaking point happened. My realization happened right here in this fluorescent lit room. I watched the primary investor sign the preliminary approval forms and push the heavy documents toward Marcus. My brother beamed despite having zero understanding of the compromised structural shear wall on the 4th floor. He had deliberately bypassed my required stress tests to save time, recklessly pocketing the financial difference. Looking at the digital readout on my tablet, the foundation settlement data was undeniable. The building was already sinking. Marcus was legally tying his entire corporate entity to an unavoidable catastrophic disaster. He firmly believed he was stealing my success, but he was actually stealing a ticking time bomb. I mentally categorized the exact administrative levers I would pull. The demolition had begun. My family operates as a perfectly calibrated parasitic ecosystem. The dynamic was established early by our mother. She treated my mathematical aptitude as a communal utility meant to serve Marcus. When our father passed away, he left behind a commercial real estate portfolio valued at exactly $2,400,000. The estate was placed in a joint trust. Marcus immediately leveraged the trust to launch his luxury construction firm. He installed himself as the chief executive officer. I was appointed as the silent technical director. This title was a strategic fabrication designed to trap me. It legally bound my engineering license to his corporate ventures without granting me any voting shares. For 5 long years, he aggressively drained the company's operating capital without facing a single consequence. Marcus funneled $312,000 into personal lifestyle expenses under the guise of corporate marketing. Whenever I flagged the discrepancies in our quarterly audits, the family closed ranks against me. Our mother would call my private office line. She spoke in a soft, condescending tone designed to induce guilt. She constantly reminded me that Marcus was the charismatic face of the family. She claimed he desperately needed the visible trappings of success to secure lucrative client contracts. I was instructed to be the reliable brother. I was told to stay in the background and ensure the math worked out perfectly. They actively framed my logical objections as petty, selfish jealousy. It was textbook gaslighting wrapped in heavy familial obligation. Marcus did not possess the cognitive stamina to read a standard geotechnical survey. He relied entirely on my subterranean load calculations to keep his concrete buildings standing upright. I performed the tedious, invisible labor. I spent thousands of hours analyzing complex soil density reports. I calculated the precise tensile strengths required to prevent foundational collapse. Tensile strength simply means how much stress a material can withstand before breaking. Meanwhile, he attended extravagant networking dinners and accepted industry awards for my engineering achievements. The arrangement was highly efficient for them as long as I remained completely compliant. They systematically extracted my personal financial resources and harvested my proprietary intellectual property for their own exclusive benefit. They assumed my quiet disposition meant I was weak. They mistook my analytical silence for submission. They completely failed to realize that absolute silence is always the most optimal condition for gathering highly actionable data. Marcus confidently assumed a commercial construction empire ran purely on handshakes and expensive whiskey. It actually runs entirely on a centralized building information modeling network. I personally built our entire digital infrastructure from scratch using a custom Linux server. I controlled the administrative access to our primary design software. That software costs exactly $14,250 in annual licensing fees. I diligently paid those fees from my personal accounts to keep the firm operational. Marcus never once asked how the architects accessed the structural schematics. He just stupidly assumed the digital files magically appeared on his desktop every Monday morning. My most powerful asset was not the software itself. It was my absolute control over the firm's professional liability insurance policy. In commercial construction, you cannot break ground without a massive errors and omissions policy. Our specific policy covered up to $20 million in catastrophic structural failures. My personal engineering license was the sole credential underwriting that massive insurance policy. If I removed my name from the master underwriter registry, Marcus would be legally barred from pouring a single ounce of concrete. His entire multi-million-dollar operation would instantly become an illegal, uninsured liability. He also took my exhausting, daily stress mitigation modeling completely for granted. Every single night, I meticulously ran complex automated wind shear simulations on his upcoming high-rise designs. Wind shear is simply the force of wind pushing heavily against the side of a tall building. I adjusted the steel rebar configurations to keep the towers from snapping during a storm. I held the encryption keys to these highly sensitive modified blueprints. The municipal building department required my encrypted digital signature for every single phase of construction. I had previously set up an automated script to sign off on minor framing adjustments. Marcus genuinely thought he was the one securing those critical daily approvals. I possessed absolute, unmitigated administrative dominance over his entire daily professional workflow. I had the power to sever his connection to the engineering network with a single keystroke. I was the invisible architect of his carefully curated professional reality. He was merely a loud tenant living inside a highly structured system I had deliberately designed. He was completely unaware that the foundation of his fake empire rested entirely in my hands. I quietly began changing the primary recovery email addresses on our core municipal building portals. It was Tuesday at exactly 4:15 in the afternoon when I executed the severance protocol. Marcus had just posted a photo on social media. He was standing in front of the downtown high-rise project. He captioned it claiming another massive milestone achieved by his brilliant team. He was completely unaware of the structural shear wall deterioration I previously discovered. That specific post was my definitive breaking point. I did not call him to argue. I did not text our mother to complain. I simply opened my secure administrative terminal and began the systematic dismantling. First, I navigated to the State Engineering Licensing Board portal. I formally submitted a notice of professional dissociation. This document legally detached my structural engineering license from his corporate entity. I paid the $75 processing fee from my own checking account. It took administrative effect immediately. Next, I logged into the primary insurance underwriter secure gateway. I completely cancelled the $20 million errors and omissions liability policy. I cited an irreconcilable breach of critical safety protocols regarding the concrete slabs. Without my active engineering license, the insurance policy was legally void anyway. Then I targeted the municipal permit system. Our city uses a centralized digital infrastructure for all commercial construction. I accessed the master dashboard using my highly encrypted administrative credentials. I systematically revoked every single active building permit associated with his firm. I flagged the downtown project for an immediate, mandatory geotechnical audit. This triggered an automatic stop work order across all his active job sites. A stop work order means every piece of heavy machinery must legally shut down immediately. Finally, I addressed the financial bleed. I logged into the joint business checking account. The current available balance was exactly $412,980.12. This money legally belonged to the original family trust, not his personal LLC. I executed a priority wire transfer, moving the entire sum into a highly secure escrowed holding account. I immediately froze his corporate credit cards. I permanently cancelled the automated lease payments for his luxury sports utility vehicles. The entire administrative process took exactly 47 minutes from start to finish. My heart rate never elevated above 68 beats per minute. I systematically cut the necessary life support to his entire fraudulent operation. I removed his access to the proprietary design servers housed in my office. I changed the master server passwords to a complex 20-character cryptographic hash. He was now completely locked out of his own company. He had absolutely no liability insurance and no active city building permits. He had absolutely zero access to working operating capital or payroll funds. He was simply a man standing on an empty construction site with nothing but a forged reputation. I closed my heavy workstation laptop and poured myself a glass of cold water. The profound silence in my private office was deeply and physically satisfying. The administrative demolition phase was officially complete. The initial shockwave hit the next morning at exactly 9:14. Friday was our bi-weekly payroll distribution for the heavily leveraged independent contractors. The automated clearinghouse transfers bounced simultaneously across 3 different commercial banks. My phone screen lit up with an urgent incoming call from Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before I finally tapped the green answer button. His tone was initially dismissive and slightly annoyed. He assumed there was a minor software glitch with our primary merchant services provider. He demanded I fix the routing numbers immediately so his concrete pourers could get paid. I informed him that the accounts were locked due to his unmitigated liability exposure. The dead silence on the line lasted for exactly 4 excruciating seconds. His mild annoyance instantly pivoted into a blind, aggressive panic. He began shouting about calling the local police to report massive corporate sabotage. He threatened to sue me for an immediate breach of fiduciary duty. A fiduciary duty simply means a legal obligation to act in the best financial interest of another party. I calmly reminded him that I was never legally granted any voting shares in his corporate enterprise. You cannot logically breach a legal duty that was never officially contracted. He slammed his heavy fist against something hollow and metallic in the background. He screamed that I was completely destroying our family legacy over a petty technical disagreement. I ended the active call and permanently blocked his personal cell phone number. Less than 12 minutes later, my mother initiated her deeply predictable psychological countermeasure. She bypassed my cell and called my secure private office line. Her voice trembled heavily with an entirely manufactured sense of utter devastation. She asked how I could be so incredibly cruel to my own flesh and blood. She insisted that Marcus was under an immense amount of daily pressure and just needed my unwavering support. She explicitly demanded I restore the server access and apologize to him immediately. She firmly warned me that she would personally write me out of the remaining estate if I did not instantly comply. I listened to her entire emotional performance while quietly monitoring the municipal dashboard. The automated system showed that 2 major electrical subcontractors had already filed preliminary mechanic liens against the downtown property. A mechanic lien is a legal claim against a property by unpaid contractors that prevents the owner from selling it. The total value of those 2 pending liens was $280,000. My mother continued crying softly into the plastic telephone receiver. She bitterly claimed my father would be deeply ashamed of my vindictive administrative behavior. I politely informed her that my father would actually be entirely terrified of the compromised concrete foundation on the 4th floor. I hung up the phone and exported the fresh lien data into a secure encrypted spreadsheet. The family apparatus was thrashing blindly against the structural reality I imposed. They misunderstood the absolute mathematical certainty of their complete ruin. The trap was not about catching Marcus doing something entirely new. It was about documenting the illegal actions he had already completed. I opened the centralized server access in read-only mode. I initiated a deep packet extraction of his archived project communications. Deep packet extraction is a highly specialized method of retrieving hidden digital data from a secure network. I carefully cross-referenced his exact material purchase orders against the architectural blueprints. The financial discrepancy on the downtown project was exactly $142,600. He had deliberately substituted grade 60 steel rebar with a significantly cheaper imported grade 40 variant. Grade 60 rebar is the incredibly high-strength steel skeleton, keeping commercial concrete from cracking under heavy weight. The cheaper variant was physically incapable of safely handling the necessary lateral loads. He authorized this massive illegal substitution in an unencrypted email to our primary supplier on October 12th. I captured a clean forensic screenshot of the timestamp and his digital signature. Then I aggressively targeted the geotechnical soil compaction reports. The municipal code strictly requires a minimum foundational soil bearing capacity of 3,000 pounds per square foot. Marcus paid a corrupt third-party surveyor exactly $8,500 to completely forge the final compaction metrics. I found the cleared cashier check image deeply buried in a mislabeled marketing folder on his local hard drive. It was fraudulently categorized as a seasonal promotional event expense. I compiled these data points into a meticulously formatted digital document. The final official report contained exactly 84 dense pages of undeniable financial and structural negligence. I did not just collect his careless corporate emails. I mapped his exact GPS location data from his company phone on the specific dates the forged inspections occurred. He was physically logged at a luxury golf resort in Scottsdale while legally signing off on the concrete foundation pour in Seattle. Every single piece of damning evidence was heavily cross-verified using his own digital footprint. The trap was a pure administrative masterpiece. I neatly organized the comprehensive dossier into 3 distinct evidentiary categories. These categories were gross financial embezzlement, criminal structural negligence, and systemic commercial insurance fraud. I uploaded the heavily encrypted file to 3 separate and highly secure remote cloud servers. I retained the master decryption key on a physical flash drive locked inside my fireproof wall safe. Marcus was currently spending his entire day screaming at confused bank tellers and leaving me completely unhinged voicemails. He completely failed to realize I was actively transforming his entire corporate history into a massive federal indictment. My breathing remained perfectly steady and rhythmic in the quiet, dark office. The compilation of raw facts required absolutely zero emotional input. The cold mathematics of his deep corruption were simply revealing the inevitable truth. He had carelessly built his entire identity on a weak foundation of lies. I finally possessed the exact legal blueprints to systematically tear it all down to the ground. The summons arrived on a Tuesday at exactly 6:14 in the evening. My mother invited me to her large house for a mandatory family dinner. She claimed she had prepared a beautiful prime rib roast for us. It was a transparently orchestrated ambush designed to physically corner me into total compliance. I arrived at the property exactly on time. I wore a tailored suit and carried a slim leather briefcase containing a single printed legal document. Marcus was already sitting silently at the heavy dining table. He looked exhausted and uncharacteristically quiet. My mother immediately poured me a glass of expensive red wine. The vintage cost exactly $185 per bottle. She smiled warmly and spoke in a gentle, highly practiced cadence. She said we needed to put aside our minor professional differences for the sake of the family. She claimed Marcus was ready to formally apologize for his recent aggressive outbursts. Marcus stared intently at the polished mahogany table and mumbled a vague apology. He said he was just stressed about the concrete curing schedules. Concrete curing is the chemical process where the cement hardens and gains structural strength over time. He slowly pushed a heavily redacted contract across the table toward me. It was a retroactive licensing agreement. He wanted me to legally backdate my engineering approvals for the downtown project. The document offered me a meaningless 10% equity stake in a newly formed shell corporation. Equity stake simply means partial ownership of a business. He believed a worthless paper promise would immediately buy my absolute submission. My mother gently placed her warm hand over mine. She whispered that this was my perfect opportunity to finally become a true partner. It was a pathetic, highly calculated attempt at emotional coercion. I did not touch the wine or the fraudulent contract. I looked directly into my brother's bloodshot eyes. I calmly explained that backdating a structural engineering stamp is a severe federal felony. A felony is a major crime punishable by extensive federal prison time. I informed him that I would absolutely never assume the legal liability for his catastrophic negligence. The false warmth instantly vanished from my mother's face. She abruptly withdrew her hand and sat back in her heavy wooden chair. The pleasant familial facade shattered completely in less than 3 seconds. Marcus slammed his fist onto the table and shattered his expensive crystal wine glass. Dark red liquid spilled heavily across the crisp white legal documents. He screamed that I was completely ruining his life out of pure petty spite. I stood up slowly and deliberately adjusted my tailored suit jacket. I picked up my leather briefcase and walked calmly toward the heavy front door. The structural integrity of their psychological manipulation was fundamentally compromised. I had just gathered the final piece of absolutely necessary legal evidence. The printed retroactive contract proved he explicitly knew the previous approvals were completely forged. The steel trap was now permanently sealed shut forever. The emergency municipal zoning board meeting began on Thursday at exactly 9:30 in the morning. Marcus stood confidently before the 5 city commissioners and a room full of primary investors. He wore a sharp navy suit and loudly blamed a minor software glitch for the recent permit suspensions. He formally requested an immediate emergency override to resume pouring the massive concrete foundation. I quietly entered the heavy oak doors at the back of the civic auditorium. I carried exactly 3 thick-bound copies of the 84-page encrypted dossier. My brother froze mid-sentence when he saw me steadily walk down the center aisle. I did not yell or create a dramatic theatrical scene. I calmly approached the primary investor syndicate seated in the front row. I handed the lead financial director the first heavy-bound copy. I placed the second copy directly on the central commissioner desk. The microphone on the podium loudly amplified Marcus, stammering a weak, defensive objection. He nervously claimed I was just a disgruntled former employee attempting illegal corporate sabotage. I ignored his frantic voice and plugged my secure encrypted flash drive into the main projection system. The massive auditorium screen instantly displayed the forged geotechnical soil compaction reports. The large room went completely silent as I zoomed in on the $8,500 cleared cashier check. I methodically explained the critical, immediate danger of the illegally substituted grade 40 steel rebar. I clearly stated the structural shear wall deflection was currently at a dangerous 7%. Deflection simply means the heavy concrete wall is actively bending outward under massive pressure and will inevitably snap. Have you ever watched a deeply arrogant person finally realize their fake empire is entirely gone? Tell me in the comments exactly how their face changed in that exact devastating second. Marcus physically gripped the wooden podium with both hands as his face rapidly drained of all color. He desperately tried to pull the thick projection cable from the wall. The lead financial director rapidly flipped through the dense pages of undeniable forensic evidence. He loudly read the precise GPS data proving Marcus was actively golfing in Scottsdale during the required foundational safety inspections. The primary investor stood up quickly and aggressively demanded to know exactly where his $142,600 went. My mother was sitting 2 rows back and covered her mouth in absolute horror. The chief city building inspector leaned heavily into his microphone. He immediately declared the downtown high-rise a catastrophic public hazard. He permanently revoked every single commercial building permit associated with the fraudulent corporate entity. He formally requested municipal police presence to secure the highly dangerous construction site. Marcus looked directly at me with a pathetic expression of utter terror. I calmly disconnected my secure flash drive and placed it neatly back into my tailored suit pocket. I systematically dismantled a corrupt 5-year corporate legacy in exactly 8 minutes of methodical public presentation. The absolute total destruction of Marcus's company took exactly 4 days to fully materialize. By Monday morning at 8:12, the state licensing board permanently revoked his commercial contractor status. This action instantly triggered a massive default clause hidden deep inside his primary investor agreements. A default clause simply means the investors can legally demand all their money back immediately if the contract is breached. He owed them exactly $4,250,000 in direct capital restitution. His corporate bank accounts were already frozen from my prior administrative severance. Therefore, the aggressive financial syndicate immediately targeted the original family estate trust. My mother had foolishly co-signed his massive construction loans using her personal property as collateral. Collateral is a physical asset a lender can legally seize if a borrower fails to repay a massive debt. She received a certified letter of aggressive foreclosure on Tuesday at exactly 11:30 in the morning. The bank demanded her massive physical estate be entirely vacated within 30 days. The local district attorney formally opened a massive criminal fraud investigation regarding the substituted grade 40 steel rebar. The grand jury issued a sealed federal indictment for massive wire fraud and systemic structural endangerment. They arrived at his luxury leased condominium on Wednesday afternoon with a heavily enforced search warrant. They seized his personal computers and completely drained his remaining personal checking account. The account only held a pathetic $12,410. The state forcefully seized his 2 leased luxury vehicles on Thursday morning to satisfy outstanding debts. My mother frantically left exactly 14 deeply hysterical, screaming voicemails on my blocked secondary phone line. She begged me to release the heavily encrypted escrow funds to pay for his elite criminal defense attorney. I simply forwarded her desperate audio files to my personal corporate attorney. I instructed him to aggressively file a permanent restraining order against both of them immediately. Marcus was officially barred from stepping foot onto any commercial construction site within the entire state. The city completely demolished the compromised concrete foundation of the downtown project at his exact financial expense. The demolition cost exactly $312,400. He was entirely ruined in absolutely every single quantifiable financial metric of modern human existence. His completely fake empire was now permanently reduced to a massive pile of heavily legally disputed concrete rubble. On Friday at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, the final escrow transfer cleared my private offshore account. The total secured sum was exactly $1,412,000. This capital represented the exact mathematical value of my previously stolen intellectual property. Intellectual property simply means the original engineering concepts I personally created and legally owned. I sat alone in my new architectural firm overlooking the grey Seattle skyline. My resting heart rate was a perfectly calm 62 beats per minute. Marcus was currently facing a mandatory federal sentence of 84 months for corporate fraud. Our mother was quietly renting a tiny apartment using her severely depleted social security checks. They both believed power was something you projected loudly into a crowded room. They completely failed to understand that absolute power is just the quiet control of underlying systems. What foundational systems in your own life are quietly being controlled by someone else right now? Leave your deeply honest answer below before your own foundations finally collapse under massive weight. I took a slow sip of my dark roast coffee and opened a fresh structural blueprint. The new commercial high-rise design required extremely complex foundational load distribution calculations. Load distribution is the specific engineering process of safely spreading immense weight across solid ground. I carefully dragged my digital stylus across the glowing tablet screen to reinforce the steel base. Building a completely bulletproof structure requires removing absolutely every single compromised element before you pour concrete. I had successfully removed the toxic human elements from my personal structural foundation forever. The resulting silence was the most structurally sound environment I had ever happily experienced. My new empire was finally built on pure, unbreakable mathematics instead of fragile familial obligation.